Welcome to CrimePod Castle. I'm thrilled to have you here for the third episode of our Ghosts of the Past series. Today we're diving into a pivotal moment in Indian history, the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi. You wanted to explore this event, and it's not hard to see why. It's a story of political intrigue, international conspiracies, and ultimately raises questions about justice, the devastating impact of extremism.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that this event goes way beyond a simple political assassination. The ripples from this event touched international relations, changed the fight against terrorism, and sparked debates about justice and forgiveness that continue even today.
Okay, so let's set the stage. I think many people, even if they don't know the specifics, know that Rajiv Gandhi came from a famous family. Can you give us some context about who he was and why his assassination was such a huge deal?
Absolutely. To understand Rajiv Gandhi, you have to understand the Nehru Gandhi dynasty. His grandmother was Indira Gandhi, a dominant force in Indian politics, and his great-grandfather was Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister. So Rajiv was born into a legacy of leadership.
So this wasn't just some politician. He was practically political royalty. But he wasn't always in line for the top job, right?
No, not at all. Rajiv Gandhi was actually a pilot by profession. It was only after the tragic death of his brother Sanjay that he stepped into the political arena to support his mother Indira.
And then, of course, Indira Gandhi herself was assassinated in 1984. That must have been an incredible weight on Rajiv's shoulders, stepping into her shoes like that.
It was. He became prime minister at the young age of 40, inheriting a nation in turmoil and facing immense pressure to live up to the family name. It's interesting to consider how different his life might have been if he hadn't been thrust into that role.
So he took over as prime minister, but it wasn't all smooth sailing from there, right? What was his time in office actually like?
It was a mixed bag, really. On one hand, he pushed for technological advancement and began to open up the Indian economy. These were significant shifts for India at the time. But on the other hand, his tenure was also plagued by allegations of corruption, which tarnished his image and created political enemies.
So he was a leader who sparked a lot of debate, both positive and negative. But all of that came to a sudden end in 1991 at an election rally. This was a moment that shook India to its core. I'd love to get a sense of what it was like on the ground that day. Can you take us back to that fateful day in Sriperumbudur?
Imagine a typical campaign rally, a festive atmosphere, music throngs of supporters all there to see Rajiv Gandhi. It was supposed to be a routine stop on the campaign trail. It's this normalcy that makes the event so shocking in retrospect.
Yes, because amidst all that excitement, tragedy was about to strike.
Exactly. A young woman, Danu, approached Rajiv Gandhi as if to greet him. She was wearing a traditional Tamil attire and carried a garland, a seemingly harmless gesture of respect.
But as we know, that garland was anything but harmless. It was a cleverly disguised bomb, wasn't it?
Danu was a suicide bomber, and the moment she got close enough, the bomb detonated, killing Rajiv Gandhi instantly and claiming the lives of many others who were nearby. The sheer brutality of the act is truly horrifying. The damage was so severe that Rajiv Gandhi was reportedly identified by his shoes. That detail alone speaks volumes about the devastating power of the explosion.
That's a chilling image. What must it have been like for the people there to witness such a sudden and violent act? It must have been complete chaos. Where did investigators even begin to try to solve this case?
It was a massive undertaking, one of the largest investigations in Indian history. The Special Investigation Team, or SIT, had to sift through a mountain of evidence, track down countless leads, and interview hundreds of witnesses. They were faced with a horrific scene and a complex puzzle to piece together.
And in the midst of all that, a clear suspect emerged,
Yeah.
the LTTE, right?
Yes. The Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, a Sri Lankan militant organization, quickly came into focus. Now, for anyone unfamiliar with the LTTE, they had a long history of conflict with the Indian government. They were fighting for an independent Tamil state in Sri Lanka and saw India's involvement in the conflict as a major obstacle to their goals.
So there was already bad blood between the LTTE and the Indian government. But why target Rajiv Gandhi specifically?
That goes back to Rajiv's time as prime minister. He had made the decision to send the Indian peacekeeping force, the IPKF, to Sri Lanka in an attempt to disarm the LTTE and bring peace to the region.
So instead of disarming the LTTE, the IPKF actually ended up escalating the conflict, and the LTTE saw Rajiv Gandhi as the architect of their misery.
Precisely. And with Rajiv Gandhi back on the campaign trail seeking to reclaim the office of prime minister, the LTTE saw an opportunity to strike a blow against their perceived enemy. They feared he might intervene in Sri Lanka once again if he were to regain power.
So investigators believed that this assassination was a preemptive strike, a way to eliminate a threat before he could become prime minister again. But how did they actually prove that the LTTE was behind it? What kind of evidence did they find?
Well, the investigation uncovered a trail of evidence pointing directly to the LTTE. They analyzed the bomb fragments, traced the explosives back to LTTE sources, and even recovered photographs of Danu the bomber taken shortly before the attack.
So this wasn't just a random act of violence. It was meticulously planned and executed.
Absolutely. The investigation revealed a complex web of operatives, safe houses, and smuggled explosives. They even found evidence of practice runs leading up to the assassination. It really paints a picture of the LTTE's commitment, resources, and ruthlessness.
It sounds like they were determined to make sure this operation succeeded. But what happened to the people involved in the plot? Were they ever brought to justice?
The investigation led to a series of arrests, but some key figures unfortunately managed to evade capture. One of the most dramatic moments in the case was the suicide of Savarasan, who was considered the mastermind behind the operation. He, along with several of his accomplices, took their own lives rather than face arrest.
Wow, a suicide pact. That's a chilling detail. It suggests they were fanatical, but also perhaps afraid of revealing something if they were captured alive. What a blow for investigators to lose those key players.
It was a significant setback. Losing those individuals meant losing valuable insights into the inner workings of the plot. However, despite this loss, the trial proceeded in 1992.
And what was the outcome of the trial? Were those who were apprehended held accountable for their roles in the assassination?
Yes. Ultimately, 26 people were convicted for their involvement in the assassination. The charges ranged from conspiracy to murder and terrorism. Some were sentenced to death while others received life sentences.
Given the magnitude of the crime and the number of individuals involved, this must have been a landmark trial.
It was. And one of the most notable aspects of the trial was the involvement of Sonia Gandhi Rajiv's widow. She actually pleaded for clemency for Nalini, one of the convicts who was initially sentenced to death.
That's a decision that must have sparked debate. Was it right to show mercy in such a case? To make that kind of plea after experiencing such a profound loss is remarkable.
It certainly speaks volumes about Sonia Gandhi's character and also raises questions about the nature of justice and forgiveness, especially in cases as complex and emotionally charged as this one. It was a decision that many people struggle to understand, but it ultimately highlighted the complexities of navigating grief, justice, and mercy on such a public stage.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, there's room for compassion. But even with the convictions, it feels like this case wasn't truly closed. You mentioned earlier that it was reopened years later. What prompted that decision?
There were lingering questions, inconsistencies, and a sense that the full story hadn't been uncovered. Some believed there were international connections that hadn't been fully explored, perhaps even other groups or individuals involved in the plot. The sheer scale of the assassination and its implications fueled speculation and a desire for a more complete understanding of what had transpired.
So did the reinvestigation reveal anything new? Did it lead to any breakthroughs or change the original verdict?
It didn't overturn the original convictions, but it did highlight the sheer scale of the conspiracy and the challenges of fully uncovering every detail in a crime of this magnitude. It also underscored the fact that even with convictions, there may always be unanswered questions fueling speculation and debate for years to come. It's a reminder that some events leave an indelible mark on history, and the quest for answers can continue long after the initial shock has subsided.
Right. So the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi was more than just a tragedy. It was a turning point in Indian history. What would you say were the biggest consequences of this event?
The assassination had a profound impact on India's security policies. It led to a reassessment of security protocols, particularly for high-profile political figures. It also brought the issue of terrorism to the forefront of national consciousness, prompting a more aggressive stance against extremist groups both domestically and internationally.
And what about the LTTE? Did they face any repercussions for their actions?
The assassination put the LTTE under immense international pressure. Governments around the world condemned the attack, and many countries began to view the LTTE as a terrorist organization. This international isolation, combined with their ongoing conflict with the Sri Lankan government, ultimately contributed to their downfall during the Sri Lankan Civil War, which ended in 2009 with the defeat of the LTTE.
So in a sense, justice was ultimately served, even if it took many years and came at a high cost. But I imagine the scars of this event still linger today.
Absolutely. The assassination of Rajiv Gandhi left a permanent mark on India. It's a stark reminder of the human cost of political violence, the fragility of peace, and the enduring challenges of combating extremism. The event continues to be a subject of debate and discussion as people grapple with its legacy and its implications for India's future.
If we put ourselves back in 1991, How would you have reacted to this news? It must have felt like the world had shifted on its axis.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
I think there was just this wave of disbelief and shock, right? Because Rajiv Gandhi came from a family that had already experienced political violence, his mother.
Oh, yeah.
So there was a sense of history repeating itself, this feeling that India was cursed to relive these dark chapters. And then there was also just this overwhelming sense of fear, I think.
Yeah.
Fear that the country was descending into chaos. Fear that this was just the beginning of more violence to come.
It's hard to imagine the weight of that moment. And even though the LTTE was ultimately defeated, the underlying issues that fueled their rise, ethnic tensions, political instability, a sense of marginalization, those issues persisted. And they continue to be challenges that Sri Lanka and the world are grappling with today.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that violence is rarely a solution, right? Addressing the root causes of conflict is essential for lasting peace. You can't simply eliminate a group or an individual and expect the underlying issues to disappear.
So what does this all mean for us, the listeners? Why should this story, this deep dive into a tragedy from decades ago, resonate with us today?
I think this story offers a valuable perspective on some very important things. The complexities of justice, the fragility of peace, the enduring power of forgiveness. Even amidst the darkest chapters of history, there are glimpses of hope, compassion, and resilience. And it's those qualities that we need to hold on to as we navigate the challenges of our own time.
That's a powerful message, and one that I think resonates deeply with me, and I hope with our listeners as well.
Yeah, me too. It's a reminder that even in the face of immense loss and suffering, we can choose to respond with empathy, understanding, and a commitment to building a better future.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi, what's the one key takeaway you would like our listeners to remember? For me, the biggest takeaway is that this event wasn't just a tragedy for India, but a wake-up call to the world about the dangers of extremism and the long-lasting ripple effects of political violence.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I absolutely agree. It demonstrated the interconnected nature of global security and how events in one corner of the world can have far-reaching consequences that we might not anticipate.
And on a more personal level, it highlights the human cost of these conflicts, the individuals and families whose lives are forever altered by acts of violence.
Exactly. And it's something that we often forget when we're talking about these big events. We have to remember the human side of these stories and approach these complex issues with empathy and understanding, recognizing the multifaceted nature of conflict and the need for peaceful resolutions.
Well said. So as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. How do we as individuals and as a global community grapple with the weight of such events? What does justice look like in these situations? And how can we work towards preventing future tragedies?
Those are profound questions and ones that each of us needs to contemplate. There are no easy answers. But I believe that engaging in thoughtful dialogue, seeking understanding, and fostering empathy are crucial steps towards building a more just and peaceful world.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a pivotal moment in history. If you found this episode insightful and thought-provoking, we encourage you to share it with others and continue the conversation. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to CrimePod Castle so you don't miss future episodes.
And we'll see you next time.
Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.